Board of Education meeting for Monday, June 12th. If everyone would rise to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. Let the record show we have all board members present except for Ryan Osmus and Tammy West. And we need an adoption of the agenda, including the supplemental personnel report. Do we have an amended agenda?
We have one consideration sheet that's been amended to save us $3,800.
Oh, okay.
Didn't figure you'd have a problem with that one.
No, I don't think so.
Make a motion to adopt the agenda with the supplemental personnel report.
I'll second.
Motion by Tracy and a second by Brian. All in favor? 5-0. And we have approval of bills. Barbara, were you able to look those over?
I was last Friday, and I reviewed them with a staff member of the Business Operations Office. And there were no apparent irregularities, and I move now that the board approve them.
Okay. We have a motion by Barbara. A second?
Second.
Second by Tracy. All in favor? 5-0. Okay, we have no special presentations this month. Recognition of visitors. Persons may present ideas or concerns regarding USD 443 schools. No action will be taken by the board at this meeting. Personalities and behavior of employees are not to be presented during this period, but are to be reported to the employee's immediate supervisor. The president shall determine the amount of time to be spent for citizen participation. If you'd like to address the board, please approach the podium at this time. Seeing nobody, we'll move ahead. We have next up the consent agenda, which includes the approval of personnel, including the supplemental personnel report, the approval of minutes for our May 22nd Board of Education meeting, the approval of the 2017-18 Nutrition Handbook, the approval of school fundraising requests for the next school year, and overnight student trip requests, approval of disposal of musical instruments, approval of reimbursement for Board of Education members' internet access, approval of Southwest Plains Regional Service Center services, approval of additional Dodge City High School STEC CAP grant funding, approval of classified professional development handbook, approval of Every Kid in the Park at Fort Larned grant acceptance award, approval of bids for band and orchestra instruments, and approval of career cruising software renewal.
We did add to that for the agenda tonight, the Bright Beginnings handbook that we left off the agenda.
Sorry.
Had a first reading last month.
Okay.
Are there any questions about anything on the consent?
No questions?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Tracy and a second by Barbara. All in favor? 5-0. All right. Under new business, we have curriculum and instruction. First off, we have the Sunflower Bank ABC check presentation with Shanda Schulte.
I think Shanda's
Is she
here.
not here?
If you don't mind, we'll wait a few minutes and see if she
Sure.
makes it.
All right. So next, moving on, we have the computer purchases. Ray?
Good evening, Mr. Superintendent, board members. In your insert, we revised the sheet that was presented to you last Wednesday. We actually came in with the bid, and the topic is computer purchases for the 17-18 school year. That's the coming school year. I want to emphasize maybe that if the budget doesn't allow it, we won't do it. but usually we don't ask for extra monies to do that. We just work with what we have and try to leave enough money in the technology budget, computers, to make it through the year. And so this is what this is about. And this, I also want to mention that we started this process 2 years ago. This is the third year we do. I came to you about this time to replace computers, and this should pretty much finish it up. I also want to emphasize we have machines out there 10 years old. The best example I can think of is in my office. We won't replace certain machines because they sit there and do one thing. Like I have specialized scanning software set up years back, about 9 years ago already. And as the years went by, we don't need that software very much. We computerized everything. So it's just sitting there. About all I have to do now with it, unless somebody requests something, is for the high school, the end of year for the seniors. They still have me do that every year. And so it's just going to sit there, and it's just 10 years old. I can't justify replacing the machine for a good one, and that's all the machine does. So we still have machines out there in classrooms like that. We're looking how much they're used and analyzing that. And if they're just used once in a while for something special throughout the year, we will not replace them. We'll just leave them be. The new computers we try to put in areas where they're going to be utilized. I also want to emphasize, I also put there, it says mostly staff machines here, but I also want to emphasize some of those machines will be used to replace the Read 180 machines. The Read 180 software, the iPad is not sufficient for that. So we still have to use computers for that. We got one bid in, Sterling Computer Corporation. One came in too late. The business office sent it back. I still feel very comfortable with this because this is the same company that got the bid 3 years in a row now. So we're asking for 200 computers. They run at $11.31 each. They look pretty much exactly like this machine over here. And they've got a little bit, it's the exact same model as we got last year. We were lucky to get that. And that means the guys know how to work. It's one image, and we don't have 15 different images laying around to re-image if we have to. So if there's not any question, we're asking for approval. The total amount is $226,200 for 200 machines from Sterling Computer Incorporated.
Ray, just for my edification, what's the 180 software? That you
What?
Read 180.
It's the Read, the Read 180, okay.
Read 180. It's Scholastic software that they use for the lower-end kids, right, Jackie? For the lower-level kids, they identify them, and
And the iPads
once
don't
in a
run
while,
that? And the iPads don't run that?
Your iPads won't work on that.
Okay. I'd make a motion, we accept the recommendation and the bid for the computers at $230,000.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion by Jeff and a second by Tracy. All in favor? 5-0.
Okay.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
We have the folks here
Yeah,
now from
looks like
Sunflower Bank.
Sunflower's here.
Just the people behind you there. Hi, Maria, come on up if you don't mind and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Ferreiro. I have been with Sunflower Bank for about 27 years. I am the consumer lender. With me is Roger Mesa. He is the supervisor for the branch, and we are very pleased to be here. And we thank you for the opportunity. We are here to present you with a check because you have given us the opportunity to participate for the ABC program. This is our 4th or 5th year in a row, and it has been a privilege for us to go ahead and participate, give back to you, and we are partners in education, and we really appreciate that. So here we are.
Okay. Y'all want to come on up here and we'll get a picture too.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Maria, you want to give her their,
It says we have to approve that.
I didn't think there'd be a question.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, the board's on board.
No need.
There's-
I think we'll give the check. So we'll get it back to them. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
Thank you
coming
so
in.
much.
She's nice. She calls me darling.
She does. Too.
Yeah.
You're not alone. Yeah, if we could have a show of hands of everybody that Maria calls darling. Jeff thinks he's all alone.
Oh,
so.
I'll get you back for that.
All right, next up, Human Resources.
Very good.
Good evening, Madam President, Board of Education, Superintendent Cunningham. Tonight I wanted to bring you a staffing update. That's what we usually do this time of year. We've been really busy recruiting and placing teachers, so I just wanted to give you some information on that. I sent a form in your board packet, but since then I've done some updating to it. So what we have right now are 7 teaching positions. 6 of those are elementary, and 1 of those is a mid-level English position. We have an opening for 1 part-time school psychologist, 6 assistant coaches, 1 choral accompanist, and 4 classified openings. I also wanted to let you know that we have placed 4 student teachers that will be in our district student teaching in the fall. 4 of those have already accepted assignments for the spring. So we will put a long-term sub in that class in the fall while they are conducting their student teaching, and then that individual will take over the course.
And I'm sorry, Ramona, so that's 4 of the 7 open positions actually have somebody?
No, that's in addition to.
Okay,
That's in addition.
Yeah, in addition to, we have 7 that are open
okay,
with no plan yet.
gotcha.
But we have placed 4 student teachers, and we have placed 7 long-term subs, in addition to those 7 that are still open.
Okay,
I looked back through last year's notes, and we are a little better off than we were last year, so not enough to get really excited about, but we are pushing forward. We have 3 interviews set up this week, so that's encouraging, and we have a couple of more leads that we're going to try to set up as well. So we are at that time of year where we're starting to really kind of look at some things, but we're not giving up just yet. Also, the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Committee that was formed last year will be meeting Wednesday this week. We will look at spring recruitment, the outcome of that, what worked, what didn't work, what we might want to do differently next year. We do have 1 principal, I think, that will be joining us, and that principal has suggested that maybe we also meet with the other principals at some point after we kind of get a plan together for next year. So I think we'll do that. I think that's a good idea to generate some more ideas on what we might do differently next year. It's a very competitive market out there. I had the pleasure of attending several of those recruitment events this spring and have some thoughts on what I would do differently next year, and I'm sure some of our other recruiters will as well. That's the information that I had to share with you tonight. Do any of you have questions for me?
You said it's been very competitive, a very competitive environment. What are the schools telling you where you're going to recruit? Do they have more or less education majors, or they're about the same?
Definitely less. I had one institution reach out to me where I had registered to attend their career fair and said, gee, I'm just going to tell you that we only have a few candidates that are even available. Most of ours have already accepted positions somewhere. And the candidates that are available are really looking in this one particular geographic area, which happened to be on the other side of the state. And so he said, it's totally up to you if you want to make the drive out here and do that or not, but it just felt like he needed to let me know they don't have very many candidates anyway. a large number of them had already committed to other districts, and those that hadn't were looking in very specific areas. So we didn't attend that one, but we did attend, I think, 11 or 12 other ones. And what I saw there was a lot of schools are showing up at these. I saw some from Las Vegas. I saw some from California, a lot of Texas, obviously. Just people are showing up at all of these Midwestern career fairs trying to dangle carrots for, high starting salaries and those kinds of things. I did see some pretty substantial sign-on bonuses as well, so we're not the only one out there offering that. Students that are graduating have a lot of choices. That's the way that has turned over the last several years.
So do you think an emphasis towards the grow your own type of programs is more important?
I really do. What I found when I went to these recruitment fairs is that students, for the most part, want to stay near home, and they have the option to do that. It's not like they're graduating and have to take a job anywhere they can find one. If they want to stay near their hometown or near their college, they have the option to do that. So I do feel like that's a challenge for everyone, not just Dodge City. That's a challenge for everyone. So we have had some discussions with some university reps from various institutions about what would it take to develop that pipeline of teachers from their institution to us. And, obviously they want our students from Dodge City High School. They will train them up and send them back to us is sort of the theory of it all. So we're working on some relationships with institutions to try to get that going, and particularly some institutions maybe we haven't had a large representation from in the past.
How's the Newman program doing? I mean, how is its enrollment?
The Newman program is, and Glenn can speak to this as well. He's been involved with teaching at the program, and I taught a class for them last fall and had the opportunity to kind of meet some of their future graduates, get to know them and see what their skills are beforehand. And I have to say that's been a real benefit to have that insight. But they're doing a great job of working with these students, getting them geared up. I think when I've watched the Newman students come to interviews for teaching positions versus some of the other colleges across the state, I think they're very competitive. There are no obvious gaps there, any more so than any other new teacher. Obviously, when you're a new teacher, and I can say this because I was this new teacher at one time, you don't know what you don't know. And you walk out of there not really prepared to teach in the style that we're accustomed to in Dodge City. So we know that we have to have those supports in place for those new teachers. That's why the new teacher orientation is so important when they come in 3 days ahead of time and really learn how do you use iPads to teach in the classroom, because not all student teachers have that experience in other districts. So they need that when they get here. And that instructional support that is available through our instructional coaches. Candidates coming here, when you mention that, their eyes kind of gleam a little bit because they're feeling scared and they're feeling unsure if they're really ready to do this. And when you say you've got a mentor and you've got an instructional coach and we really want to help you get to where you need to be through professional development, that is something that means a lot to them.
Okay. Is there any opportunities for us, and going back to Lisa's question about homegrown, is there any further opportunities for us to partner with Newman? I mean, is there anything else we can do to grow our own? And then I've got another question. Go ahead.
Okay, well, it's about identifying potential candidates. Obviously, Newman does some recruiting as well, for their students on their own. But if we as employers can identify current employees that are classified, perhaps a para or long-term substitutes, that really do a fine job for us in our schools, we need to identify them and give them the information and whatever assistance we can provide. And by the way, I've got some ideas on that might come up in this strategic plan for next year. and really get them on the path to pursuing that degree. And there are a number of institutions that we can work with to do that, to make that process as easy as possible for those candidates. It is a time and money commitment. There's no doubt about that. But there are some things that we can do as a district to identify those individuals and then support them in that process. So I think that would be one really great way to get people into that homegrown pipeline.
And then my follow-up question to that is, once we get these quote candidates and once we get them into the system, and I don't even know if there's a question here, but our mentoring program, our coaching program has got to be top shelf. It just I mean, are we satisfied? And I don't think we ever get to a point where we're satisfied, with it. But it really, I just want to stress from my chair sitting here how important that mentoring process is and mentoring the mentors.
Right. And I think that's an outstanding point. And I think it's something that we should never neglect to review that program and how it's impacting those new teachers, and possibly surveying the new teachers or just having a conversation with them. How helpful was this to you? What are your thoughts for how it could have been better? I think the fact that we have it and we invest in that is a tribute to how seriously we take preparing our teachers to educate our students. And it's a great investment if we're doing the best with it that we can. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're doing that.
Well, I go back to the statement that I heard since the day one I walked in here. We can talk about computers, we can talk about everything, but education takes place between a teacher and a student. And I just want to make sure that we are allowing our teachers to teach, and we're giving them every possible resource we can.
I agree.
That's kind of my thought process right now above anything else we do. We're building facilities. Bill's got his hands full with that, and we're going to have the facilities. But every effort to make sure we're mentoring, coaching, developing, our teaching staff. And I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I just want to say publicly that is my number one, there's no close second, emphasis as we go. So I appreciate your efforts, and I know you're out there busting it hard, because recruiting right now in the state of Kansas, we've not gotten a lot of help.
That's right.
And I think everyone's doing a great job, and I appreciate that.
That's right. Thank you.
Let you know, there's not one silver bullet that'll fix that problem.
No.
We have in place the KTT program, Kansas Transition to Teach. We've got several folks we identified a couple years ago that are not licensed teachers, but I think they had to have a bachelor's degree to get into it. We've got 2 or 3 different programs going that have 2 to 4 to 6 people in each pipeline, but they all have different regulations and guidelines and are getting people into the teaching profession, but it's through several different doors.
We've got something with Hayes, K-State is
Yeah,
the one that
what
has
I'm
the
thinking
bachelor's
of.
for the master's. Friends is recently putting together a new program, and so we've got.
And Wichita State also has one that in a year and a half, you can be licensed with, if you've got a bachelor's degree already.
We're also starting to have conversations with some universities to go in a little bit sooner. The job fairs, they already have jobs. So we can talk to them sooner and kind of show them what we have and what we are as a district. Then we're hoping that will help, because they're making their decisions quicker. And then the mentoring piece, I'll share a little bit more with that later, but the state has changed some of the requirements, and we already with our initial mentoring program had already met the more rigorous requirements that they're now putting out. But with new requirements, that's making us go back and really look at what we do have. There's now a needs assessment that we're going to have on hire with someone, and then we'll set goals based on those needs assessments and follow up. And that's something that we're adding to the new teacher checklist throughout the year that the mentors will work with, and then we'll revisit that at the end again. And so there's some additional layers that we're putting in, partially because the change of requirements and partially because of just a reflection on what's working, what's not. So, and even an opportunity right now, well, in the past, they only required 1 year mentorship, and we've always had 2 years, but now they're asking for more than 1 year, and which then we've already got year 2 in, but there's a possibility if teachers need additional support, content piece, or just adjustment, we can add additional years to their mentorship. And so there's some different expectations there that are going through that we're adjusting to. There's some good pieces.
You bet. Just, my only thing I would say was choose your mentors wisely.
Yeah. Yep.
One final thing that I would like to remind the board is that you approved to pay our student teachers stipends $4,500 to come do 16 weeks of student teaching in our district. And what we're hoping is that those young people will want to come here and do that in our district and obviously love it so much that they stay to teach here. And so we really are putting a lot of focus on them. And we love getting veteran teachers from anywhere, but we're really realizing that maybe we're going to be a district that really takes in and welcomes these new teachers. And if we're going to do that, we have to have the supports in place to make them successful, because if that's going to be one of our strategies for filling vacancies in the district, you will have buildings that have a high number of new teachers. And you really want that educational standard to not suffer because of that. So the only way that you can do that is to give the support to those new teachers that come in. So I appreciate that you all see the value in doing that and understanding that that might be our pool that we get to fish in, and that we need to support it the best that we can.
Absolutely.
One more thing. If you need any help from the community, you know, we can sit down with the Chamber, the Economic Development Corporation, other city entities to talk about how we can set the best possible environment to recruit. Because we recruit, and we talk about that a lot. But I mean, but we need to, as a city, as a community, we need to create an environment, the best we can within the resources we have, for these young people and other teachers, you know, and not so young, you know, to move here with families.
That's right, and we've got to sell ourselves. I mean, it is a buyer's market.
Right.
And so we have to sell everything about ourselves, not only our schools, but our communities as well. And one of the things that happened, we had 2 really outstanding candidates who really wanted to teach in Dodge City, but their spouses couldn't find work.
Right.
Now, I can't maybe create jobs for the spouse, but if I could get better connected to the community and kind of know who's in what area and sort of what's developing and what's going on, if I was connected to that, I might have some leads that I could, put out there for a spouse or someone to consider that might make a difference. So those kinds of conversations could be useful.
You know, I'm not going to, when you have those situations, call me.
Okay,
Seriously.
I will do that.
Because that we need to exhaust every avenue for that.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I guess I'm not 100% sure. Capers had decided they were potentially going to change some of the rules for
They
retired
did.
teachers.
They did change.
It's been
They
signed.
did change.
So have we been able to bring any retired teachers back in with that change?
Well, that just changed, what was it, Friday?
Last Friday, I think he signed it finally.
Friday. But in anticipation that it would indeed become fact, we have been talking to some retirees about the fact that you can come back and substitute teach now, and there are no fees from Capers. There's no earnings limit on that as well, as long as they come back into a position that does not require they participate in Capers, there's no fee. And that would be the substitute. Now, if they want to come back into a teaching position, there are some CAPER fees that would be associated with a retired teacher going back into a teaching contracted position. And it's 6% for the first $25,000 that they earn, and then it jumps to 30% over that $25,000 mark. So there are some things there that we can kind of play with. And we are definitely looking at recent retirees, or even those that may have been out a couple of years and maybe ready for a little bit of excitement and ready to come back into the classroom to fill in for those student teachers for a semester, or maternity leaves and those kinds of things. But one of the things about the long-term subs that we do have lined up right now, let me look at my notes here because I made sure to write this down. We have 7 long-term subs already signed up for the entire year. 4 of those are working toward teaching licensure. So that's a good quality candidate right there that we have.
And do those 4 want to teach in our district?
Yes, they are home people that are working toward that kind of grow your own concept that we were talking about. So they do want to be here and will eventually be here as far as we know today. So that's 4 of them. We have a 5th one that is actually a retired employee from the district. So coming back in and spending some time as a long-term substitute, has done it a couple of years in the past and has very good recommendations from the principals that he's worked for. So feel like that's a high-quality candidate as well. So we are finding some good quality long-term subs.
So I guess I'm not real familiar, how competitive is our long-term sub pay compared to other districts in the area?
If you are taking a sub position in our district, like maybe a day at Beeson and a day at the high school, and you're just sort of bouncing back and forth, that daily rate is $100 a day. Not bad, but not something that you're probably going to want to make a career out of. But it's not bad. If you take a little bit longer assignment, for example, someone has to be out a couple of weeks for surgery or whatever it might be, if it is 11 to 60 days that you are subbing for the same teacher, that is $125 a day. That one, I don't know. Maybe we need to visit about that one a little bit because there's some opportunities there to do something a little bit different. If you take an assignment of 61 days or more, for example, this fall semester subbing for the student teachers, that rate is $197.95 an hour. The reason that one's so much higher, I'm sorry, day.
Volunteer.
Oh, I do it. I'm sorry.
I'm in.
You guys are really paying attention. I know.
We got principals that are going to do that.
The reason that one is so much higher because obviously if you're spending that number of days with students in a particular class, you may have to attend some of the parent-teacher conferences for that teacher and possibly do some other types of lesson planning, some different things that would be a little bit more in-depth than if you were just one day in that classroom. So I feel like that rate is really competitive. It's practically $200 a day. That's a pretty good rate. Mm-hmm. It's a long day. Have you ever subbed? Yeah, it's a long day when you do a full day of sub, let alone day after day after day. It's a tough job.
I guess where I was getting at, it would, the retired teachers to make it something they'd want to come back to. Are we competitive in the workforce with other school districts in our area?
Sorry, went on
No,
my whole
actually, I love
dialogue about that.
They are competitive with the workplace, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, if you think about, I can put the numbers together, but it's not unreasonable for a sub that's in there for a full year making the $197.95 a day to come up to $35,000, $38,000 a year.
And that's with no benefits, or?
That is with no benefits. We don't currently offer long-term subs any kind of health insurance benefit. Again, always open to discussion on that.
That's tough because you've got to meet the 32-hour a week, requirement.
But if they're fully your sub?
Yeah, but it's the months.
Yeah.
It still becomes an issue.
Yeah.
And I'd rather not get into offering health insurance.
That's kind of tricky, and the thing with health insurance right now, we don't really know what kind of turn that's going to take under the current administration, so I'm not sure where we'll be a year from now in that, so I almost kind of hate to start relying on that as being the thing that may draw some long-term subs in. I would think that's kind of an unknown right now.
The education exemption.
Any other questions?
You didn't think you'd be up here that long, did
No?
you?
It was short. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ramona.
Thank you.
All right, business services, Bill?
Good news with having her up so long, I figure there'll be fewer questions for me, so that'll work out well for all concerned. This evening, the first item is a review of the bond projects. So if I could, members of the board, we kind of have some information on page number, basically 67, but if you'd have your attention turned to the screen, I'll kind of go through this. We have some pictures this evening. You're aware that Willroads Garden, Beeson, and Lynn are pretty well complete as projects. Miller Elementary, they are in the process of connecting the new additions to the existing building. We kind of waited to summer to do that so we wouldn't interrupt classes and the flow of students. That's beginning in earnest this week. Demolition areas that are being remodeled continued. Connecting to the permanent power and the new HVAC units will start next week. Ceiling grid is complete in the classroom addition. Tack boards, marker boards have been installed. Gym addition, the cooler and freezer were installed this week in the new kitchen. Lighting was installed in the kitchen and cafeteria. And the basketball goals installation has begun. The completion date for this project has been moved up to late fall of 2017. So made progress, and if any of you all watched the bricklayers over there, it was phenomenal. Next building is Dodge City High School. Jackie's here, so if you want to jump in with anything, Jackie, please feel free. Summer work for Dodge City High School includes improvements to culinary arts classrooms, connecting the additions to the existing school, performing arts, CTE, academic and PE additions, routing of hot and chilled water piping throughout the school. The work is underway in earnest and progressing per our plan to this point. Performing arts work to connect the addition to the existing school continued. Middle and panels are expected to begin next week to complete the exterior facade. We are on schedule, ready to move in before the fall semester. That was kind of the priority that was given to us by the high school, and I think we're going to meet that priority. So appreciate that. PE addition, masonry crew has completed their work inside the locker rooms, and we continue to try to get concrete work done on the exterior, but we have lost all this week due to weather last week. Retaining wall works continue around this area. Middle building has been impacted by the weather, and we will now begin by mid-July. CTE addition, the mason work will begin Monday. We expect a great deal of progress coming up. We are on track to be completed by the end of February 2018. Dodge City Middle School, there's a whole lot of mud out there, folks. And my house, huh? It's dry tonight. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Weather hit us hard in the middle of the middle school site. We did some progress on the retaining walls and footings along the existing buildings. Footing and retaining walls will continue on the 6th grade addition, and we will begin on the gymnasium next week. The slab rough-in will begin by the end of June, and the mason will arrive in the next 2 weeks to begin work on the elevator shaft, and this project is scheduled to be completed and ready for the fall of 2018. Northwest Elementary, painting began in the classroom addition this week, and the overhead rough-ins are wrapping up. We will begin the corridor tile in the restrooms and corridors next week. Ceiling grid will be installed by the end of the month, and we will have light fixtures around the 4th of July. Kitchen progressed this week with the wall rough-ins completion and the beginning of drywall. And by the way, I do want to thank the staff. We got into Northwest Elementary to start the kitchen early. Worked with staff, worked with Kathy Conradi and the food service people, and that really has put us ahead in that project. We appreciate it because that kitchen has to be up by fall to be working because we've got another kitchen down. And so anyway, a lot of folks really helped out in that. We appreciate it. The rain prevented the cooler freezer installation, but this will go Monday if conditions allow. Further progress on the exterior wall to the north was impacted by the weather. Kitchen equipment arrives in mid-July, and the kitchen will be completed this summer. Schedule for the classrooms is improved from an October completion to early September. Final completion is scheduled for February of 2018. Sunnyside Elementary, we are currently finishing drywall and will begin tile work Monday of next week. Drywall finished in the classroom areas will continue next week, and painting will immediately follow. Exterior window installation will begin next week. We'll have floor covering installed before the 4th of July. The cabinetry and marker boards have been delivered and will be installed over the next 3 weeks as well. The project is on schedule to be completed this summer and ready to move in before the fall semester. I might also mention that on Sunnyside, we also have the Bright Beginnings edition. We have completed the 25 questions required by the grant people, and our folks are supposed to meet with their folks at a meeting tomorrow. And please, oh Lord, please let them tell us it's all okay so I can get that contract issued and we can move on. We will not issue the contract because they were kind of, the way we understood the contract was if we moved on before they signed off on the final go-ahead, they might not pay. And since it's $500,000, we thought that was significant. So anyway, but our folks have done a great job getting that together, and we do appreciate all the work and effort that's been into that. So we will have another project at Sunnyside as soon as the feds sign off. Sewell Elementary, steel erection crew has continued to work this week and will complete the detail work by the end of June. Work continues on the exterior office renovation this week, with the parking lot work will resume as soon as weather permits. This project is on schedule for the end of July 18th completion. In Central Elementary, which is amazing if you've driven by that, the structural masonry and the music room storm shelter was completed this week, and the west wall of the gymnasium was nearly completed before the rain on Thursday. The mason will be back this weekend to give a jump start on the work for next week. The old kitchen structure was removed, the exterior stairs in the north end were removed and hauled off-site as well. We went with a structural engineer to review the stage demolition, and he is finalizing detail of his plans to stabilize the walls as the stage is removed. Might mention on this, the stage was basically a structural element of Central Elementary. And we could have designed that so we actually had to go up a ramp to get into the library, what's going to be the library. So we've done a lot of work trying not to have that ramp take the square footage and lose it for the ramp, but it meant the stage had to come out. And we're just being really cautious about how we do that. They've opened that up. They had the structural engineer come out to look at it. We had a pretty good idea of what we're going to do anyway, but we're proceeding with caution because we want to do it right and not have any problems with it. So it's not that there's really a holdup. We're just being kind of extra cautious on that because we don't want any problems with that. So that's going forward. The project will be completed for the start of the fall semester in 2018. Ross and Comanche will have a security walkthrough scheduled for next Wednesday with all the interesting subcontractors for next Wednesday. I believe they had 11 express interest, and pricing is expected by the end of June and will be followed up with interviews of competitive companies. So that's kind of the story. Any questions on the bond update? And I guess I'd also say if you would like to have another turret someplace, if you'll just let my office know, we'll be happy to schedule that, and we'll be happy to have our architect and Ryan Rowley come out and go through it with the board.
Okay.
Any?
Looks good.
Okay. Next item, as we move forward with these projects, and I have probably messed this up enough that at this point the board understands what I'm saying, even if maybe at some point we do get a little confused. Part of the project on this is the budgets are several different places. The furniture budget was in a budget that's maintained by the architect. The furniture we basically buy direct because there's really not an installation per se with the contractor. You know, it comes in, it's put out, it's done. There's other pieces of equipment that are in the architect's budget that we actually move over to the contractor for installation. For example, kitchen equipment. We want to make sure that there's one person responsible for building the building, making sure all the equipment fits, all the connections are correct, and bluntly, it's a turnkey deal. When we walk in, it all works. So there is a difference. But the first one is basically for the purchase of furniture for Sewell Elementary, Millville Elementary, Northwest Elementary, Kindergarten, and Dodge City High School Performing Arts. There will be additional furniture. Jackie, you're aware of this, so I didn't want anybody to get nervous. There's about $1 million of furniture that's going to be in the high school before we're done with this. But this is to get that first addition completed. So we'd appreciate that being approved this evening at the board. So, any questions?
Make a motion to approve the office furniture.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion by Brian and a second by Barbara. All in favor? 5-0.
The next piece I bring this evening is on page 72, and it's basically, we call them change orders because that's the way that the architectural contracts and the work. But basically, this is a result of, there's really two funds that we're using to fund these things from. One is what we call transfer funds. In those cases, for example, on the first item on this, lockers and projection screens, those were maintained by a budget that's in the architect. And this basically says, yes, board, you're aware that we're taking money out of the architect's money for this and putting it over to the contractor, so it's part of his contract. The other things are basically coming out of owner's reserve. As you're aware of, any time we have a project of this magnitude, we do have some contingency funds built into the project, and that's where these dollars are coming from. So basically, we'd ask this evening if we could, for the board to approve the change orders for Dodge City High School in the net amount of $217,701, with $72,827 being transferred from the architect's equipment budget to the contractor's project budget, and $144,874 being paid from the owner's reserve account, which is included in the bond project fund. And the board is further requested to authorize the board clerk to issue a purchase order, sign the change orders, subject to review by board council.
Are the lockers, is that student lockers? No, I didn't,
Athletic lockers, isn't that?
gotcha.
Those are,
Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. I didn't think that we really used student lockers or needed them. Okay. Okay.
good question, good question.
The status of our owner's reserve. And
Um,
we still have an owner's reserve, we still have a builder's reserve.
Yes, the reserve account for the design, which is part of where these are coming from, we're about out there, but we still have money in the builder's contracted reserve. We also have some reserve money in the budgets from Tom in the architectural fund. So at this point, I'm trying to think how to say this politically correct. We're pretty cautious about spending money. We look at every dollar we spend, and so far, we're pretty well on budget, if not a little lower on some areas. But we're in fine shape. We put enough contingency in the if you don't put contingency in a project, you're going to have problems. It's kind of like we talked on the tour of the bad dirt. We hit some bad dirt in the front of Northwest Elementary. It cost us some money to take care of that, so buildings that have a good foundation. We had an issue at Central Elementary. We hit an old foundation from a building that nobody knew had been there, but it had to come out and get repacted. We took care of those, and there's dollars in the project to take care of those kinds of things. So we're just moving on, getting taken care of.
So you're comfortable with the contingencies we have
Yes.
and how the projects are moving?
Absolutely. And the only thing we're going to have at the other end of this, we have added some parking lots to the project. We've expanded some parking lots. As you remember, the city wanted us to put more parking at Central Elementary. We also looked at Miller. We needed to do it. We've added those things. Will there be enough money for all those at the end of the project? There may not be, but we do have a capital outlay fund that we will have adequate resources to take care of it one way or the other at that point. So there are a couple things like that they really weren't part of the project to start. We may be able to work them in the project. If we don't, we'll have funds beyond that to take care of them. So there's no reason at this point. Everything that we've told the taxpayers, the voters, is going to get done. And we're going to be able to do a few extra things that are really going to enhance the project. So that's where we are.
Alan, are you going to talk about the state in your report?
Yep.
Okay. I'd make a motion that we accept the change orders for Dodge City High School out of the funds that, the swapping of the funds and then the $144,000 out of the contractor's project budget.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Jeff and a second by Tracy. All in favor? 5-0.
And the last one this evening is change orders for Sunnyside Elementary, Sewell Elementary, and Northwest Elementary. One thing that might just note a couple things, because this is kind of, I think, instructive to the whole situation. We pretty well have a standard. We started actually when we did the addition to Comanche Middle School. One of the things we're really encouraging kids is to drink water. And please don't take my example, because I don't drink water. I just didn't grow up doing that, but it's really good for kids to drink water. We basically, instead of just having water fountains, we put bottle fillers on them. They're a little more expensive. But we found that we've had good response to that within our district. And so we think by having the bottle fillers, that's a district standard. For some reason, those got left out of Sunnyside. And we made sure that they got back in there. There's a little more money for those. That was worthwhile. Second thing is we have had options or alternates for every project on LED lighting. And we've looked at those and we've analyzed it isn't a little more money going in, but it's better energy use. And it's also less maintenance because they just last longer and you don't have guys climbing on ladders to replace them as often. So that's been pretty well as we've gone through the project. We've added the LED lighting in. So again, those are a couple things that we've just been doing.
Bill, what's intruder glazing?
The intruder glazing on this is what we did is we looked at a number of different glasses that we want. Basically, these are in some of the entryway areas specifically. And it's basically, we came up, there are some name brands where you pay a lot for the name, but not necessarily any better products than some other things. And they came up with a product where it's I'll call it it's almost like a sandwich, and there's some glass in it, and then there's a panel of something else, and there's some more glass. And we basically had them build one of these things, and we had Chris take a hammer to it. And you can't hammer through it. So that's what we're using on some of the buildings. Again, it's not, quote, the name, but we think it's going to do just as well as the name would have done and a lot less money. So that's what that is.
Safety issue.
Safety issue.
Very good.
And LED lighting's a no-brainer. I just spent a fortune on LED lighting in our labs. And
It's a first cost versus total cost
It's
of
a
ownership
no-brainer.
issue. So,
So, somebody else spent some money.
Make a motion to approve the change orders for Sunnyside, Sewell, and Northwest.
Second.
Motion by Tracy and a second by Brian. All in favor? 5-0.
listen, I appreciate it. I think the only other thing coming up that we've talked about before with the ice storage at Dodge City High School and the middle schools, which includes Sewell, there will be some things that we're going to have on that. But again, we've kind of got that planned in capital outlay. But it's one of those things where it's a pay me now, and we're going to get payback for the rest of the life of those projects. So we will bring that to the board. I was hopeful to have it this evening, but we just didn't quite get all the numbers on it. So we're working on that too. So move on. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
If you have any questions, please give my office a call. We'll try to answer anything we can.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Cunningham?
Good evening. Don't have anything prepared for you as far as in your agendas, but because we didn't know what was going to be happening with the legislature and the governor's office by the time we got the agenda out last week. But 113 days later, the legislature approved both a tax policy and a school funding formula, and they adjourned and went home. And they're due back, I believe it's June 26th for the sign-die session. And that is contingent upon any other action by the legislature, by the Supreme Court. There are several things that can happen with the school funding. Right now, the funding formula has been approved and the tax policy to fund it has been approved. The governor vetoed it, but the veto was overridden by both houses of the legislature. So that is a done deal at this point. What isn't a done deal is to know whether or not the Supreme Court will agree that it was sufficient. You remember we settled the equity portion last spring, and are now dealing with the adequacy portion. Depending on the district you're in, it may look really adequate or may not look adequate for us because the formula basically reverts back to the old formula. It does weightings for students based on need, like free and reduced meals, like bilingual students, students that have to be transported. Virtually, the formula is very, very similar to what it was back before the block grants. And our district comes out in pretty good shape. Is it where we would like to be? No, but it's better than we think we could have hoped for. If you'll remember back in 2009, the funding, what we called base state aid per pupil funding, was over $4,400. Currently, for the last 3 years, it's been $3,852. This new law gets it up to $4,006 for the coming school year, $4,128 for the following school year, and then based upon the consumer price index in the Midwest, it is anticipated to go up another $60 to $80 a year each year thereafter for the next 4 or 5 years. When I do the math, it's going to take us to about 2025 to 2027, somewhere in that range, before we ever get back to the same level of base state aid funding we had in 2009. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have an entire generation of students going through our schools that have been affected by reduced school funding. And matter of fact, we're going to be well into our second group of students going through our schools. That's an issue that the Supreme Court will have to decide if it's adequate, if what they're proposing is adequate or not. There are a lot of other nuances to the school funding formula. Some of those nuances are political in nature. In order to get some urban legislators to support it, for instance, the at-risk weighting, which is typically based off free lunches, was amended. We got the rate up a little bit, so you get a little more money for students on free lunches. But There was also concern from districts who don't have very many kids, if any, on school lunches, that they still have at-risk students, but they're not free lunch students. So one of the things that was put into the formula to hopefully get some votes from some of these urban legislators was a 10% floor. Everybody has 10% free lunches, and whether you do or not, and you get funded for it. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're a large school district with 40 or 60,000 people or students, which some of these are, 10% is going to be a significant amount of change. We don't know what the Supreme Court's going to say about that. There are about 3 or 4 other little things like that that toy with equity and adequacy and actually benefit some districts to the expense of other districts. For instance, the LOB, it virtually remains the same, but it grandfathers those districts that had a 33% LOB compared to most of the rest of us who had a 30%. It does make it easier to go to 33. We just have to do it with board action and then hope nobody protests it and we have to go to an election, which is simpler than requiring an election, which was the case before. But it still gives those districts who were able to do it a 3% pad, if you will, of additional funding. And there may be a question about whether the Supreme Court thinks that's equitable or not. If you ask me to look into my crystal ball, what I will tell you right now is I think, well, there's 3 things that could happen. First of all, the governor hasn't signed the school funding bill. He hasn't signed it. He's got the tax money is coming in to pay for it, but he hasn't signed it. He could veto it, which would require a special session of the legislature to come back before or after sign and die to override his veto or give it a shot to override it. He could let it become law in 10 days without his signature. So I think it's June 19th will be the 10th day. I thought it was business days, but the law says 10 days, so it's calendar days. So they're telling us that on the 19th, we'll know whether or not he's going to sign it or just let it become law. Or he can just go ahead and sign it now, and it goes off to the Supreme Court. What we're asking for, what we believe we need, not only for us, but I think every other district in the state, is to let this thing get to the Supreme Court as fast as possible so they can take a look at it. They can identify the parts they support. They can identify those parts that need to be tweaked or worked on. And we can get going. If the governor signed it today, it could be in the Supreme Court in 10 days with the state putting their arguments forth. We would have 10 more days to respond to those arguments, and the court would then take whatever time they needed to respond to it. I think most of you may have seen in the newspaper or on the news that the Supreme Court Chief Justice has already said they will expedite. Once they get everything they need from the attorneys, they will expedite the hearing so this thing doesn't go any further than it has to. If the governor delays and waits 10 days and then signs it or lets it become law, it just delays 10 days getting it to the Supreme Court. If he vetoes it, then it's even going to be later than that. Again, back to my crystal ball, if I was to guess, I would presume to say that the Supreme Court will support the funding, the amount of funding, even though it's not what most of us consider adequate, but that they will have issues with about 5 or 6 portions of the school funding formula. Probably the 10% floor for at-risk students, probably the 33% LOB, and 2 or 3 or 4 other ones similar to that. I would hope that the legislature would say the funding is sufficient. Now go back and fix these aspects of the bill that are not equitable or adequate and give the legislature time to do that. That means we wouldn't have any issues with closing schools. They would just get the chance to go back and fix it. Whether or not the Supreme Court would give them this summer to get that fixed before school starts, or go back and say you'll have next legislative session to get it fixed, is up to the Supreme Court. Nobody that I talk to believes they'll give them the next legislative session. Because once you get something in practice, for instance, this 10% floor, and one of the school districts actually gets $1.9 million additional funding because of the 10%, once you've given it to them, it's going to be very hard to take it back if they decide to change that part. So I really think they'll do something yet this summer. It may mean a special session, probably will. With that being said, I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will keep jurisdiction over this thing for the next several years to be sure, number one, it's implemented fully like they said they would, and that 2 years down the road, we don't start making cuts like we did with the last one 2 years into it. We think that they'll maintain oversight over this thing pretty much indefinitely for the next 3 to 5 years before they dismiss it. So Monday, the 19th is the next important day. The funding formula either becomes law or it's passed or it's signed by the governor, and then it gets its way to the Supreme Court. If it's vetoed, that whole process is delayed another probably week or 2 weeks. So that's all we know right now. Dodge City looks and comes out pretty good compared to a lot of other districts with this new funding formula or the return to the old funding formula. The problem is it would have been money if we'd have stayed under the old formula, we'd have had this much and more by this time. So we're still going to be several years behind what we would have been if we'd have just kept the old formula in place. But it's a lot better than the alternative. So
Do you see a shutdown in the crystal ball, or you think?
I really don't see a shutdown unless the court comes back and says it's just not adequate at all. The amount of money is not adequate. I don't know if they'll do that. I think the court will support the formula for the most part, except for these little tweaks. The biggest question is whether the legislature put enough money into it to consider adequate. Because if $4,400 was adequate in 2009,
Right,
then what makes $4,000 adequate
today.
10 years later? But they also know the realities of the legislature and the economy too. So it'll all come down to that decision. So I think we're okay. I think this probably averted a shutdown. 2 weeks ago, I'd have said there's an 80% chance we're going to close down. Whether we close down for 2 weeks or 10 days or a month, I didn't know, but I think we would have had a shutdown. The fact that they overrode the veto, I think, probably keeps our schools open. We just don't know what the court's going to rule on the adequacy, on the amount. Okay, we'll talk some more about that when it comes into negotiations and teacher salaries here in the executive session in a little while.
Okay.
Any questions?
Well, lots of questions, but there's just
And
no answers right
I
now.
don't have any answers either, so.
What would, I mean, you probably can't answer, but what would be the advantage of the governor just not signing it?
It just becomes law automatically after 10 days.
Why, I mean, but why would he? I mean, if he's going to allow that, wouldn't he rather get the props for signing it?
He doesn't agree with most of
He's
it.
getting so hammered in the national
Yeah.
press. I'm talking about,
Yeah.
I mean, the Washington Post, the New York Times. I mean, Kansas has kind of been the poster child for
How not to do it.
how not to do it.
And he really doesn't want his name on something that raises taxes.
Yeah.
That requires a tax increase. So my feeling is he'll probably let it become law without his signature, but that just delays everything 10 days. And I hate that.
And you got to understand the animosity between the courts and the governor.
Oh, yeah.
They both would, yeah. Anyway, that's all I'll say about that.
That's all I know, too. More than I know, probably.
Okay, thank you.
What's our pre-enrollment,
Kindergarten pre-enrollment, 2 weeks ago, or last time I looked, we were at 460 something, I think. Do you remember?
We were at four.
We were at 443.
We were 443.
At the end of the,
At the end of the cutoff, the enrollment window, and then we added 20 after that, so 463.
and we've added some since then.
Update past that.
That was like the week after the
Get that and
deadline.
put it in weekly review.
How does that compare to last year at this time? Just if
Very,
you
right
remember.
there.
Right on.
Right at, okay. Very
We'll
good.
pick up another 100 kids over the summer and when school
That's
starts.
what I was, yeah.
Okay. All right, Board of Education member district responsibilities, Park and Rec?
We've had a meeting on last Friday and reviewed bills with the staff. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong page here. The section on Parks and Recreation, Park and Recreation Advisory Board met in a new location on May 9th. It's in the Santa Fe Depot Training Conference Room, which is the new location for Parks and Recreation. So it's right on the track upstairs. They've all moved in there, and we had our meeting there on, that was on the June 13th. And so we got an update on the opening of the swim park, and that did take place as they anticipated on Saturday, May the 27th of May. So now the next thing that we should be getting some information for and hasn't come through yet is the joint turf project for Legends Park. And we meet tomorrow, so I'll report back again in a month.
Okay.
I guess, 2 weeks. We're having a meeting, I suppose, then.
Okay,
All
thank
right,
you.
Thank you.
Bright Beginnings and Head Start, Tracy?
For the summer, they have 2 literacy buses going out. They're doing stories and bringing lunches with them. So look for the orange and white buses while you're out and about. They're going to do some learn and play events hosted by Bright Beginnings, stories with the parents and things like this, and enjoying the gym as well. That starts this Thursday and again in a couple weeks. And they're doing summer school for the early education summer school started last week, and it'll last through the month of June.
Okay, thank you. Special education?
Well, if I remember, we did not have a quorum for the last meeting, so we could not take any action, but we're talking Dennis's evaluation and budgets and those kind of things, and it's a little disconcerting, to go to meetings and not to have a quorum. It's because you can call in, it's a frustrating board to be on. And Alan just grins because he's been going to them forever.
You have 14 members on a board, and you do good to get 6 or 7 people to show up for a meeting,
Yeah.
or to call into the meeting.
We spend a lot of money there.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of money, and they do a good job.
They do.
But it's just, from a board standpoint, it's a tough board to be on because you go there and drink a cup of coffee and you can't take any action.
So we've had more and more people begin calling in because they just don't want to invest the time. If you can imagine coming from Dighton or Ness or
Right. It's a
whatever,
problem.
driving all the way down there for a meeting and then not having a quorum. So more people are joining by the conference phone, which they bought a good conference phone, which I think you can hear and people can hear you. They did say that the per student allocations for funding special ed would not increase for next year, so we pretty much know what that budget's going to look like.
All right, Alan pretty much already covered the legislative. We've already Bill kind of covered capital outlay and where we're at on that. We've got Tammy, I'll make sure she's aware that she'll review bills prior to our July board meeting. Announcements, Wednesday, June 14th, 2017, Dodge City Area Chamber of Commerce Business Appreciation Luncheon at Hoover Pavilion, 11 a.m. Monday, June 26th, our last Board of Education meeting for the fiscal year here in the Austin Boardroom. Thursday, June 29th, State of the City Luncheon at Boot Hill Casino and Resort Conference Center, 11:30 a.m. Monday, July 10th, Board of Education Annual Organizational Meeting, Austin Boardroom at 6 o'clock. Are there items any of you would like included for future board meetings or additional information?
I've already expressed, it's in the works to talk about curriculum.
Anybody else? Okay, we need executive session. How long do we need, Alan?
I'd like to start with 30 minutes. And I would like to have Ramona and Tammy and Bill all stay for the first part of it.
Okay. Motion? Anybody?
Make a motion, we adjourn and go into executive session.
Not adjourn, just
What?
go.
Just go in.
We can take a break, but we're
We
not
can,
gonna.
we take a break and go
Yes.
into executive
Yes.
session.
Second.
Just take,
Motion by Jeff and a second by Barbara. All in favor?